Great, so now we've got a location-aware app with just a few lines of code. Our final challenge is to build the final view controller, which will allow people who've accepted each other to connect with each other. So let's take a look at what we're building. And here we go. So you're already familiar with our swiping right and swiping left system. The crucial thing that we're adding on this particular iteration is this matches view controller. So this is a new view controller with a table in it, and you can see that we're receiving messages from individual users, and these are the users that have been matched with our user. So our user has accepted them and they have accepted us. So it checks for that first off, it displays the profile image of the user, and it gives our user the possibility of adding a message to them. So we can just type that in there and tap send, and that then gets sent off to the user. And we can check that it exists in the messages field. There it is. That would appear on the user's matches page. So it's really the last piece of the puzzle, and there's some subtleties there, but there's nothing that you shouldn't be able to overcome with your current skills. So best of luck. I hope, as always, it goes well. So we're nearly there. We've got the ability to swipe right and left on users and detect whether our user has accepted or rejected another user, and then display more images when that happens. In this video, we're going to do three pretty big things to finish our app off. And the first is to add location awareness to it so that we know that we're meeting people who are at least fairly close to us, geographically speaking. Secondly, we're going to create a way for our user to see the matches that have taken place. He can see who's accepted him and who he's accepted. And then finally, within that, we're going to build a small system for users to be able to write messages to each other. So the first of those, I'd recommend you follow along with me, and then the other two, I'm going to set you as a challenge to do yourselves. So Parserver actually has location built into it. So we don't have to do a great deal to set up our location, except to add the message to info.plist. Under privacy, there we go, location when in use. We don't need it in the background. And this is to find other people near you. There we go. So now that we've added that, we can use the parse functions for getting the user location. So let's see how they work. We can do it right here in View.didLoad. And we can use what's called PF GeoPoint. So a geographical point. And there's a lovely function, GeoPoint for current location. There we go. And that will create a GeoPoint for us, or possibly return an error message, which we can then use to get the location. For now, let's just print the GeoPoint to the console so that we can see what sort of a thing it is and what information it gives us. Here we go. So you can see it's now asking for our permission to view the location. So we say OK, and there we go. You can see we've got the latitude and the longitude right there. Fabulous. So the first thing I'm going to do is save those to the user object. So we can actually save it as a GeoPoint. So let's just check that it exists. And if it does, we'll get the PF user, current user, and we'll set their location to the GeoPoint. And then we'll save the user in the background. Okay, so let's just run that and check that that does indeed save on our Parserver. And then we can look for people that are close to our current user. So there we go. The app has run with any luck. If we now refresh, remember we need to refresh the whole page because we're going to have a new column here with any luck, and there it is. So there's our GeoPoint for our current user. Brilliant. So I'm just going to quickly add a couple of GeoPoints. So those GeoPoints are obviously very close to mine. Oh, no, actually they're not. -122. So I'll have 2 that are very close and the rest that are far away. There we go. So we should only have 2 returned in our results. So let's go to our query. Here we go. And this is where we're going to add in the feature to only look for nearby users. So let's try and generate a latitude and a longitude from PF user current and then location. There we go. And then same for longitude. Looking for the location. Longitude. Then, so if we know the location of our current user, we can add where key. And now you can see we've got one called near GeoPoint, which allows us to find ones nearby. That's within 10 miles, I believe. We've got near GeoPoint where we can specify the number of miles. We can specify the number of radians or specify the number of kilometers or within a geobox even. So I think I'm going to go for the geobox, not necessarily because it's the best option, but because we're working with latitude and longitude, it will make it clearest whether we're right or wrong. Because if we go 1 GeoPoint, that should make it work. But I'm not sure how many miles, for example, those 2 points are apart. Feel free to get some better data and then try out the other functions as well. So the southwest, i.e. bottom left box is going to be, it's going to have a latitude of 1 less than our user's latitude and a longitude of 1 more than our user's longitude. And a longitude of 1 less than our user's longitude. And then the northeast is going to be 1 more on both sides. So PF GeoPoint latitude of latitude +1 and longitude of longitude +1. Okay, so let's try that out. We should now get only the ones that are nearby us, by which we're defining quite liberally as 1 degree of latitude or longitude either side of our current user. So they could still be quite far away, but that doesn't matter too much. We're proving a concept here. And before testing that, we should, of course, remove the values from accepted or rejected. Otherwise, we could well end up with no results. Okay, so now we should just get those two results that are nearby by our loose definition returned. And here we go. So if we swipe right, we get one new user, and then swipe right again. And this time we don't get any more. So we've only got those two users that were nearby. Okay, hope that went well. As always, I'm going to begin with our last view controller. And I'm going to bring in a standard view controller. And we're going to access that view controller through a bar button item on the main Tinder page. There we go. And so it's just a simple segue like that. And then on my new view controller, I'm going to add its own navigation bar with a title of your matches and a bar button item which says back, and then has a simple segue back to the main Tinder app, or main Tinder view controller at least. Then we're going to bring in a table view. Just like that, with a prototype cell as we're used to. And before we do anything else, I'm just going to set up that table view, and then we'll get into the business of showing the user their matches. So for the last time, this section, let's create a new file, Cocoa Touch class, and this is going to be our matches view controller. Subclass of UI view controller. I've chosen UI view controller, by the way, rather than table view controller, just because it makes it super easy to put a navigation bar on the top. Table view controller is a bit more complicated. You have to put it in a navigation controller, and we don't really need that here. So it's really just to keep everything simple. And then let's set our reuse identifier and also set the class, so matches view controller, and we'll set up the data source and the delegate as well. There's lots that we could forget. Hopefully we haven't forgotten anything. So over to the view controller. So now we're going to add UI table view delegate and UI table view data source. And then control click on the second of those to get our necessary methods to paste in. There they are. They're the only two we need. So number of rows in section. Initially, we'll just keep as my standard test number 4. And cell for row at index path. Let's define our cell. So UI table view cell created with a style of UI table view cell style dot default and reuse identifier of cell. Then we set the text label to be equal to just test for now, and then return cell. And it's not keen on that being public, so let's make it internal. And same with that one. Okay, so fingers crossed. If everything's gone well, we should be able to view our table view by clicking on the matches button, and then we should see 4 test rows for now. Here we go, so matches, and brilliant. 4 test results, and back. Super. Okay, so how are we going to display this information to the user? Well, there's obviously lots of ways that we could do it, but what I'm going to do is make a slightly bigger cell, and then we're going to have an image view in that cell. There we go. In fact, maybe a little smaller. Doesn't need to be huge. They've already accepted them after all. There we go. And then we're going to have a label. And that's where we'll have the message from the user, the other user that is. We'll give them a couple of lines. So reduce that to 0 in case they need more. And then we'll create a simple text field with some placeholder text. Of write a message, and then I should leave a little bit of room for a button to send. There we go. So this is going to be what the user sees for each of the matches that they have. And then, as we did in the previous section, oh yes, it wasn't quite for the last time, was it, that we created a new file? We now want a subclass of UI table view cell, and this is going to be a matches table view cell. Pop it in there. And then we want to create our outlets and actions. Actually, it's often easier from here. Once you've found everything. There we go. So our cell, first off, we want to specify that this is a matches table view cell. And secondly, so we've got our image view. I'll create my outlet for there. Then we've got our messages label, really just a message label, but that will do. Then we've got our message text field. And finally, our send button. And it's not happy with the image view there, so let's try again. I'm going to delete the existing outlet and let's try something a bit more custom. User image view. That looks better. Okay. So now over to matches view controller. So we're now going to specify that this cell is going to have a type of matches table view cell. And then, as we saw in the last section, we can now set the image view, etc. So user image view. For now, let's just set cell dot user image view dot image. That's going to be equal to a UI image from a file for now. And the file is this one. And then the message text field, we actually don't need to update at all. Not yet anyway. Messages label, let's update that. So cell dot messages label. I'll just put you haven't received a message yet. And we don't need to do anything with the button. Okay, so let's just check. We should now have 4 images, of course all the same, and messages label text and an empty text field for each of the rows of our table. And actually, just before we run that, there's a quick change we need to make. That is, we can't use the UI table view cell method for creating a cell if we want to cast it to matches table view cell, because that will create a UI table view cell. Instead, we'll use table view and then DQ reusable cell with identifier for index path. And then the identifier is cell and the index path is just index path. So this generates a more general table cell, which we can then cast to our matches table view cell. Okay, so now there we go. Beautiful. So all that remains is for us to update this and add the ability to send a message. So let's get the data that we need. We're essentially looking for everyone that has a match with our user both ways. So over in ViewDidLoad, let's create a query. So good old PF user query. That of course will need pass for. So first we'll look for someone who has accepted our user. So for that to be the case, we'll need to find someone who's accepted array contains our user's ID. So pfuser.current.object ID. Next, we'll look to see where our user has accepted them. So we want contained in this time. So we want their object ID to be contained in our current users accepted array. And we will need to cast that to an array of strings. Okay, then we take our query and we find it in the background with a block. So objects and error message. And once again, we'll just look for the existence of an object. And if we find some, we'll loop through those users and then we'll attempt to cast them as a PF user. So for now, we'll forget about the messages and just get the user image. So we're used to doing this. We'll let image file be equal to user photo, and we'll cast that to a PF file. Then we'll get that in the background with a block. Data and error. And we'll test to see if the data exists, and if it does, then we want to append that information to an array so that we can display it on the table. So let's have an images array, which is going to be an array of UI images. So we'll append that to images. And we'll need a UI image from some data. And the data is, of course, not image file, but image data. And we'll need to force unwrap that. Okay. And when we get there, we'll need to reload the table data. And that's not picking up because I haven't created an outlet for it. So let's do that now. I think it's trying to drag that into images, which is not what we want. There we go. Okay, so now instead of returning 4, we're going to return images.count. And instead of using our default image, we're going to use image is and then index path.row. Okay, just before we run that, I'm going to cheat slightly and find someone who has been accepted by our user, which is not easy. In fact, let's give them 2 accepts. I'm going to find someone who's been accepted by our user. So that's 3L and XV. So those 2 there, and I'm going to add our user's username as an array to their accepted column like that. There we go. So now let's run the app again. And we should find that we now have 2 accepteds, and we'll see the image correctly in there. Of course, we don't have the message yet. That's the final piece of the puzzle to create our mini messaging system. So here we go, over to matches, and there we go. Lovely. I do need to change the image type on the image view to aspect fit. We want to do everyone justice, but we've got our matches there, which is great. So now it's just a matter of getting those messages sorted. So we'll set up sending first and then receiving. So this is all going to be in TableViewCell.Swift when the user presses the button. So we're going to want parse here. And an important thing is we're going to need to know the user ID that we want to send the message to. So I'm going to do it in a slightly cheeky way. And I'm going to add a hidden label zoom in enough to get that. And this is going to be completely hidden and is going to contain the user ID of that particular user. So let's add an outlet for it. User ID label. And then in Matches View Controller, we'll set it up so as well as appending the image, we've got an array of user IDs and we'll append to them as well. There we go. And then here we'll take cell dot, then what did I call it? User ID label. And we'll set the text to the user IDs variable there. There we go. So now the cell knows who it's sending a message to, but still, before I do anything with parse, I think I want to just confirm that. So let's just print that value and also print the message text field .text as well. Just so that we know that we can use both of those variables and send them to parse. And then all we're going to do is create a messages class on parse and save the user ID of the sender and the recipient and the message. So here we go, over to matches, and then when I click send, you can see we've got, yep, the user ID there. And we've got the message content too. Brilliant. So let's create a message object, which is going to be a PF object with a class name of message. And then we'll set the message sender to be equal to the current user's username. Or the object ID. Then we'll set the message recipient to be equal to the user ID label .text. And finally, we'll set the message content to message text field .text. Then we're ready to save message. And I'm just going to use save in background. We don't need to show the user that it's done, though you could show an alert or something if you wanted to. There we go. So let's just try that out. We should be able to send a message and have it save on parse. Of course, it won't actually appear for our user yet. That's our final step. So here we go, over to matches. And then let's do a check. Hi there, and then send. Definitely looked like it did something there. So let's refresh. And fingers crossed, we'll see a message object. There it is, with a single message, with a recipient, content, and sender. Wonderful. So all we have to do now is go back over to the Matches view controller. And once we've got the image data, we're going to do a new query, which is going to be a message query. And this is just going to be a PF query because it's on an object, not a user. And then we're looking for where the string is equal to a string. So we're looking within messages. Actually, we should give this a class name. And we're looking for recipient to be equal to our user. So that's pf user dot current dot object ID. And we want the sender to be equal to the user ID of the user that we're currently getting the details of. So then we take our query, we do it in the background. So find objects in background with a block. Objects and error. And if we find one, we'll loop through and we'll try and create a message out of it. As a PF object. And then finally, we'll look for the message content. Which is going to be message content as a string. And what we really want to do is to append that to a messages array, which again is going to be an array of strings. And the important thing here is to append everything at the same time, and then it'll be at the right place in the array. So what I'm going to do is, regardless of the result here, we're going to set message text to be equal to no message from this user. So that will be the default. And then if we have a message from the user, we'll update message text, which I should actually create. Message text to be equal to message content. And then down here, down here, not even there, down there, this is where we'll update everything. So we'll copy down this code, including the S, and we'll append messages with message text. Okay, and let's just see what's wrong with that. Okay, so it looks like that is definitely a PF object. So I'm just going to update that to message and then get rid of that if statement and the closing curly bracket there. Okay, and one more thing, we'll probably need a fancier unwrapping there. Yep, kind of double unwrapping required. Okay, and then we can take here cell dot, I think it was messages label, dot text equal to messages index path dot row. And because we've created messages, user IDs, and images at the same time here, we know that they'll all have the same number of values. If you wanted to be completely sure, you could use an if let there, just in case. Okay, so let's quickly jump over, and I'm going to cheat by swapping the sender and recipient of this message. So it suddenly appears that it comes from one of the users to our current user. Okay, with any luck though, we should now be able to view and send messages between users. Let's take a look. Here we go, so matches, and there it is, fantastic. So we've got that message back from the correct user, and we're able to write messages to those users if we want. Wonderful. So we've built a pretty complex app there. We're able to swipe left and right on users, or if we would at least, if there were any in our geographical area that we hadn't already swiped left or right for. We can obviously log in and log out, and we can view matches and write messages to the people that have been matched to us. So that was definitely the most complex app we've built so far. You'll be pleased to hear that in the next section, we're moving away from Parse for a bit to give you a little bit of a break, and we're going to create a game. In fact, we're going to create the frustratingly addictive Flappy Bird game using SpriteKit. There's a lot of fun to be had. Give yourself a bit of a break, have a nice cup of tea, and I'll see you back at the beginning of section 9.